on with us. We're getting some reactions as well. We're now learning that a number of democratic lawmakers have now assailed the decision, stating that free speech is under attack. There have been several reactions on social media, which have been swift and varied. Prominent figures have been weighing in on the controversy surrounding ABC's decision. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has criticized the move as part of a larger coordinated effort to stifle free speech, calling the actions of those in power as dangerous for democracy. Adam Schiff, U.S. Senator for California, has also denounced what he described as a direct attack on the press and the freedom of expression, highlighting the Trump administration's increasing pressure on media outlets. Chuck Schumer, U.S. Senator for New York, has stressed upon the importance of defending free speech and has urged both sides of the political spectrum to speak out against the situation. Additionally, Elizabeth Warren, U.S. Senator for Massachusetts, has raised concerns about Trump's growing influence over media, arguing that his tactics of silencing dissent are undermining democracy. Meanwhile, TV host Michael Costa has also voiced his alarm, urging TV networks to stand up against what he sees as a dangerous precedent for censorship. That's not all. TV host Don Lemon has also warned that the indefinite preemption of Jimmy Kimmel Live should send a chilling message to Americans, stressing upon the broader implications for free speech in the country. And last but not the least, Democratic National Committee Chairman Ken Martin has condemned the Trump administration's efforts to what he claims is a crackdown on free speech, emphasizing how the government has, quote-unquote, weaponized its power to restrict media access and silence opposition voices. These high-profile reactions continue to fuel in, fueling the debate over this controversy. Mr. Sutherland, I'd like to rope you in once again. I'd also like to bring forth the reaction that has been put forth by U.S. President Donald Trump. He's, of course, hailed the cancellation that has taken place. He stated that it had to be done. But what's also interesting is that he's also taken a dig at other late-night comedians, including Jimmy Fallon, including Seth Meyers, and called them total losers. Is that really warranted at this stage?
Well, you should then add Stephen Colbert, where a dear friend of mine was actually smeared and ridiculed by him. But that's another thing. Just to quickly go back to the names that you have actually named, like Schiff, Schumer, etc., Gavin Newsom, and others, they are all, as far as I'm concerned, on the left side of politics. And I would turn around and say that it suited them over the 4 years of the Biden administration to then ridicule Republicans, ridicule patriots. So that is what has gone on. They want free speech. That's why people went to America, to the Washington, D.C. on Jan 6, 2021 to exercise their free speech and their constitutional rights. We could cynically say that it suits people when it suits people. In regard to what President Trump has said, remember, as people have pointed out, because of Donald Trump's record in regard to The Apprentice, in regard having one of the biggest TV shows ever, in particular in America and around the world, and also his links in regard to the media, to his reactions is then not surprising as you go back in history. We have to remember that Obama turned around and said that President Trump, he will never be president in a media dinner. I believe in 2015. And also we look at Russia, we look at the court cases, we look at the weaponization of the law by the Democrats against him. So he is bearing all that in mind in regard to his comments, because these comedians, yes, we have a free speech to say, have constantly made pot shots at him, hence why his reaction. But we have to remember this: Charlie Kirk is someone who we knew, was a friend of his wife. They are friends. The other thing is that Charlie Kirk, as you said just before this, that he engaged with Gen Zs, he engaged in young people to create debate and also to challenge them from a biblical point of view, from an American Constitution point of view, from a patriot point of view, to get them to think of the foundings and the true values of America. And that is what he did. The comedians, etc., constantly challenge that, because they would then put themselves under the progressive mandate. You ask a very important question, like others, in regard to free speech. But as I say, this shooting, comments that people have made, certain individuals have then turned that in where it's very, very political. And of course, on the opposite side of the aisle, in regard to the Democrats having been shellacked in the presidential election that happened last year, they are then recoiling about that. They also have, the whole Jan 6 committee, as I said, all the court cases, all the accusations against Trump, etc. They have tried everything to make sure that he would never run again. So Trump is also speaking from that point of view in regard to all that came against him, and having seen a friend of his killed, basically you could say on live on the internet, on television, in an appalling and outrageous way. This is a very difficult line at times in regard, of course, into free speech at times, and how certain things would then be interpreted. And in regard to American society, free speech, that, as you would say, we would say, it sounds as though I'm contradicting myself in one way, that this is everything. But also, we have a responsibility, I believe, to then be respectful and how we then speak about that. But speaking the truth is also very important, and it's uncomfortable sometimes for people then to hear that. Here.
All right, sir, I request you to stay on with us. You've in fact pointed out something quite interesting. It seems that the gulf between the right and the left is only widening. Meanwhile, more news coming in from within the United States. We're now learning that US Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates for the first time since December, cutting the benchmark rate by a 1/4 percentage point to a range of about 4% to 4.25%. However, this move was not unanimous. Newly appointed Fed Governor Stephen Miran has dissented, calling for a larger 1/2 percentage point rate cut. Now, Powell has noted that the recent pace of job creation is rather slow, and a rise in layoffs could in fact drive unemployment up even further. He's also indicated that more rate cuts are likely in the months ahead in order to in fact address economic slowdown. That's not all. He's also pointed out to the fact that inflation has been taking place as well, and he's pointed towards Donald Trump's tariffs with regards to that. Take a look.
We have begun to see goods prices showing through into higher inflation, and actually the increase in goods prices accounts for most of the increase in inflation, or perhaps all of the increase in inflation over the course of this year. Those are not very large effects at this point, and we do expect them to continue to build over the course of the rest of the year and into next year. And it's also possible that there may be effects on employment, but that I would say if you're looking at why employment is doing what it's doing, that's much more about the change in immigration. So the supply of workers has obviously come way down. There's very little growth, if any, in the supply of workers. And at the same time, demand for workers has also come down quite sharply. Over the course of this year, we've kept our policy at a restrictive level, and people have different views, but a clearly restrictive level, I would say. So, and we were able to do that over the course of this year because the labor market was in very solid condition with strong job creation and all those things. I think if you go back to April and now look at the revised job creation numbers for May, June, July, and August, I can no longer say that. So what that means is that the risks were clearly tilted toward inflation. I would say they're moving toward equality. Maybe they're not quite out of equality. We don't need to know that.
All right, there, of course, we've heard what exactly the US Federal Reserve Chair has had to say. Mr. Sutherland still with us on the broadcast. This is very interesting because it comes as Donald Trump has been rallying against the Federal Reserve. He's been criticizing it. He's been threatening Powell as well, and he's been demanding to get his own way on the interest rates. He's been pressurizing Powell and demanding that he lower the interest rates for quite a while now. Donald Trump claims that this would help boost the US economy. So it makes sense that the newly appointed Fed governor has, of course, called for a further cut. That's not all. We also see Donald Trump attempting to remove Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve 7-member board as well. One of the courts did allow her to stay as a member, but we are expecting a legal showdown very soon with regards to that as well. What do you make of this Trump versus Federal Reserve war? We do know the Federal Reserve has been a largely independent body so far.
Well, Lisa Cook has her own problems in regard to the accusations over a mortgage on a house, and especially as someone who is then in a decision making to work out how high interest rates are. You make a very interesting point in regard to the independence then of the Federal Reserve, as I've always encouraged people to look at the history of the Federal Reserve, especially a book written by G. Edward Griffin about that, because it poses some very, very interesting issues in regard to the whole thing of central banking and who then controls that. Trump is turning around. He has turned around, has been very critical of Powell, of saying that the Federal Reserve has not acted quickly by then coming down by 0.25%, because, as you've just said in your piece, he was extremely worried about inflation, and now the concern is in regard to the job market. The figures that came out have said that the job market figures were not as good as maybe as they were expected. Where Trump, for a number of weeks, I've even commented on NewsX about this, has been screaming, shouting, being polite, maybe not, and at times impolite, at Powell turning around and saying, you need to lower interest rates. We look at how COVID had the huge effect on the COVID lockdowns on the American economy. Many pop and mum shops were then shut down, and the big warehouse and the big businesses, Amazon, etc., then just carried on. It devastated the American economy, and it's about having the fact that you could borrow at a cheaper rate to then expand your business. The reference to immigration is very interesting, because I am sure that within America then is looking at its skill base, as Trump is working hard, as we've discussed, to get businesses back into America, get either Apple back there producing phones. It's also had big investment from Swiss pharmaceutical industry to start building factories. That's what Trump wants. It's about getting manufacturing back, because under NAFTA or GAFTA since 1982 as well, there have been many factories, many manufacturing bases that have left America and also gone to China, which we have talked about as well. So this now is going to play out, because, as you refer to the fact that could have been gone straight to 0.5% from 0.25%. The concern would be, how do you balance inflation? Because now it is about jobs, and that is what the concern is of the president. Pia.
Absolutely, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, joining us on